So one of the first and most important tools that you want to use as a data scientist or computer scientist or engineer, developer, anything, is some sort of source control management system. And there's been an evolution of these. When I first started 20 years ago, we were using just some really, really crude tools, Subversion and CVS, things that were clunky and really large. It was hard to share amongst several people in a team, and there was no really good way of centralizing it. Git and GitHub have really made that worlds easier, and it itself has really evolved. So there's two things there. There's Git, G-I-T, which is a tool written by Linus Torvalds. It's really thin and light and clever. It works on just diffs, just the differentials between version changes. What's nice about about Git is that if I share my repository with you, you will see the full history of everything that ever happened on that repo, even if it's 5 years ago. You can do all sorts of branches and merges and pull requests and things like that. So Git is really handy. It's also really fast. GitHub happens to be a company that has really deployed the Git model quite successfully. It's not the only one out there doing it. You've got other companies like Bitbucket from Atlassian that do it pretty much close to as good, but GitHub's really stood out. And it's now owned by Microsoft, actually. But the idea is that GitHub gives you a nice centralized way of sharing your Git repositories and sort of having a floating cloud version of your repo up in the sky where all of your developers can push changes back to GitHub, and that way they can share and synchronize with each other and so on. So it's nice, and it gives you integration with issues and email and tracking, and you can do sort of project management within it in terms of your code. And by the way, you could store not only your code in GitHub and Git, you could track documents or PDFs or images or files of any kind if you wanted. I mean, it's not a storage system, so you couldn't really store, everything to run a company in there. But if you were versioning and managing a lot of tedious files, which code is, then it's really ideal for that. So I don't need you to know the world of features and options within GitHub and Git, but I need you to know a few basics. So here they are. First is I've created just an empty dummy repo here in my own account called Showboat. And we're going to go ahead and clone this. So we're going to make a copy locally. Now you have a couple of options. You can use HTTPS, which is going to require a username and password, and you kind of have to, it's kind of wonky. You kind of have to log in and log out, or log in repeatedly over time. I use an SSH key that I've added the public half of the key to my account, so I can just use this all the time. So I use the Git method. There's also the GitHub CLI, which honestly I've never even played around with. So I'm in a folder right now called Sandbox, and I'm going to clone this repository. So I say git clone, and it's going to pull it down. So now I'm going to cd into Showboat, and I see a README file, and that is exactly all that's in the repository here as well. So that's good. So I've cloned. Great. So now let's say echo blah, blah, blah into file 1. Let's say file 2. Let's say file 3. Now because I'm going to be obsessive about it, I'll say, let's change that. And now I have 3 new files. So maybe I cloned the repository, I stepped away for a coffee or for the day or two, and I've worked on 3 new files that are working. Maybe these are Python files, maybe they're CSV data files, whatever. I can always come back and I can say, well, what's the status of this particular repo? And really I can only get the status when I'm in the actual directory for the repository itself, where this little hidden .git folder is. So it says, oh, well, there's 3 untracked files. So I could say, well, git add file 1. And now I can say, what's the status? Well, so it has a new file that's been added, but it still has more untracked files. So I can actually just use a little shortcut, and I can say git add dot. And now everything's been added. So that's the first step, is you have to add your files. Now I want to commit them. And when you commit, you're getting to the point where you can't, I could always remove the files later, but they're going to be committed to the repository and tracked officially. This is sort of, the word commit is pretty important here. So usually when you commit, you want to give a nice informative message. You don't want to write an essay, nor do you want to be, nor do you want to just write something like changes made. You want something short and informative and clear. I'll just leave that just as a joke. So now I can say, what's the status? And it says everything's great. You're nothing left to commit, and the working tree is clean. That's a message I love to see. Working tree clean. That means there's no problems at all. So at this point, I can now push, and so I can say git push, and the origin from where I'm sending is called the main branch, and that's the new name for the default branch is main. It used to be called master. We've now changed to main within GitHub. So git push origin main. You're going to see some changes go on here. A nice little confirmation. There we go. It went up to InMcGee's showboat. Main from local was copied up to main on the remote. And now if I refresh my web page, I'll see my file 1, 2, and 3. So that's really helpful. Now, if there was a colleague out there who was working, they could also clone this repository. And let's say they made some changes. Let's add a file. Dummy file, blah, 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 blah. We can scroll down and we'll just use the GUI here and commit it. So yeah, create dummy file, commit it directly to the main branch. And there we go. We have dummy file now, but we do not have dummy file locally. So now I can just say, instead of git push origin master, I can say git pull origin, main, git pull origin main, blah, blah, blah. Look, we've had a +1 dummy file. So now dummy file is there. So what's cool is that I can make my changes, I can commit them, I can push them up. My friends can pull, they can clone the repo, my colleagues, they can make their changes, they can commit them, they can push them back. So we have a way of synchronizing here, left to right to left to right, and so on. Now I can also, and then with just a couple more things and we're done with this one, I can see what branch I'm on. And a branch is basically a copy of the repository. And you just choose what branch you want to be in. And if I'd like to create a new one called dev, git branch dev, I can, that basically created a new branch, which is an exact copy of main. And then if I see what branch I'm on main still. So now I can say git checkout dev. Again, same files as usual, but I can say this is a dev file. Git push origin dev. There we go. So now I created a new branch remotely of dev pushed up to dev. And if I refresh my screen, what's interesting is, look, I'm not seeing anything different. What is going on? Well, that's because I have a new branch here, and the main branch is chosen by default. So now I suddenly have dev, and I can choose that dev, and now, aha, guess what? Silly Neil. What did I not do? I didn't track this. I didn't add, I didn't commit, and I didn't push back. So now if I refresh on my dev branch, now I'll see this is a dev file. So that's a great example. It's easy to sometimes get a little confused about where you're at, what branch you're looking at visually in the GUI. You can always check, and you can say, what branch am I on here? And then you can check out, back to main. Really, maybe the last operation I'll show you, and then we're done. Let's just say I wanted to try something locally that was really, really experimental. I didn't want to mess with the main branch. Maybe this is where everybody's doing all the critical work. We will often use a prod branch for production. We'll use a dev branch for purely development stuff. Maybe a UAT branch for user acceptance testing. And then a whole bunch of just experimental branches that we'll just create and blow away constantly through the days and weeks of a project. What's nice, though, is I could do my work in the dev branch, work, iterate. I can test it out locally, run it, and so on, and make sure that it's working great. And then I'm like, bingo, excellent. I want to add this new feature, these new things. I want to add them to the main branch. I want to add them to production now. So what do? I git checkout main. And again, there's the files without the this is a dev file. And now I can say git merge dev. So I have to be in the branch, the sort of the destination branch where I want to merge things. And now I want to merge in this other branch that I'm not in right now, the dev branch. Git merge dev. So I issue that command, and now here's my dev file, now committed to the main branch, which you can see here. And if I'd like to see the log of how these things happen, you know, there's the log, there's the commit from dev, there's a commit within main, there's another commit within main, and another commit within main. And if I look at my status, I have nothing to worry about here. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. So those are your basics for using Git and GitHub. There are a lot more you could do. I'm not going to try to recreate the wheel here by explaining everything to you. There's plenty of great videos out there. And GitHub themselves have a great training section of the site where you can kind of walk through these things. But these are the really important things. You want to know how to clone a repository, maybe how to create one, how to clone it, how to add and commit and push, how to change or create or change branches, how to merge, and how to push back. So there you have it. Thanks.